Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm collaborating with scrapbook.com and sharing some simple tips to help you create this embroidered stocking for the holidays. I'm also going to share 2 additional projects that I created using the leftover components from this kit. Embroidery is one of my other hobbies that I rarely share. Today I'm going to show you a new all-inclusive kit from Violet Studio with everything you need to create a handmade stocking plus 2 additional projects that you can create with the leftovers. One of the things that I do like about these kits are the skill level meters. This kit is considered a more advanced level embroidery kit depending on the stitches that you use. Since many of you might be beginners, we are going to keep it simple today. But if you're an expert embroiderer, you are going to like how many options that you have in this kit. This comes with all of the supplies that you're going to need to make the stocking. You have a thread organizer, needle, embroidery thread, decorative pom-pom trim, iron-on transfer designs, instructions, and a very large stocking that has already been put together for you. You are going to need a few additional supplies, which I will share with you throughout the project. All of these have been listed in the description below. In the instruction guide, you have a diagram of a sample stocking with the colors used and some stitching instruction guides. If you are new to embroidery, I suggest that you practice these stitches on some scrap fabric or cardstock before you try them on the project. As I said, I'm going to keep this super simple today for those of you who are novices and want to give this project a try. We're going to start with the iron-on transfer sheets. These pages are designed to be used with a household iron or craft iron and can be transferred directly to your project so that you know where the stitches are going to be placed. From what I've experienced, these can only be transferred once or twice to fabric, which might become problematic if you have a name with more than one of these letters. As an embroiderer, I've used carbon paper to transfer some designs to my projects. If you have a name that is going to use one of these letters more than twice, I suggest tracing the letters with graphite paper instead of ironing them on. Now, these letters are mirrored because they're designed to be ironed onto the project. So you will need to flip this over a light box or place it onto a window to trace them onto the project with the carbon paper. I'm going to be using the holly, some stars, and 4 of the letters. So I'm just going to cut these out from the transfer sheets, and then I'll use some heat-resistant tape to place them pattern side down on the stocking. Before I lay these out onto my project, I want to iron the fabric. This is going to remove any moisture from the fabric and get out the wrinkles and creases that were created while it was packaged. I have placed my stocking onto a heat-resistant mat on my workspace, and I'm heating the iron to match my fabric settings. This is a cotton-based fabric, so I am using a higher heat setting. I have placed a centering ruler onto my project to help with the alignment, and I've trimmed the letters down so that it's easier to figure out their placement. I'm using heat-resistant tape to hold each of these in place so that they don't shift while I iron them. Heat-resistant tape is designed to hold up to high heat without transferring any adhesive to your project. Once all of the images are in place, I can transfer them to the stocking using the iron. I have placed the tape towards the top of the images, creating almost a hinge, which will allow me to lift them and check if the images have been completely transferred. If they haven't, I can go back over them with the iron and heat them a little bit longer. When all of the images have been transferred, I can remove the transfer sheets and the heat-resistant tape. Now, these can be used twice, so I'm just going to hold on to them for a card making project that I'll show you at the end of the video. Here I have all of my supplies ready to go to start stitching. I am using an embroidery hoop to help me hold the stocking while I stitch and to prevent me from catching the backside of the stocking. Now, this isn't necessary, but it does help keep your project stable while you are working. I have also divided my thread onto the organizer that came in the kit with all of the colors that I'm using for the project. I'm going to start with the holly image using the dark green floss. Embroidery floss comes with 6 strands of thread, but I'm only going to use 3. So I'm going to pull this floss apart. The more strands of embroidery thread you use, the thicker and more prominent your stitched image will be. More delicate images require less strands of thread. Now, threading the needle gets more and more difficult the older I get. So I've discovered a few little tools to help me with this. The first is a simple needle threader, which consists of a loop of wire that you push through the eye of the needle, loop the thread into, then pull back through the eye. This is a more common needle threader that most of you probably have in a sewing kit. The second is called a thumb needle threader. This has a small hook that you push through the eye of the needle. Once you've done that, you can loop the thread over the hook and pull it right through. Now, if you're using lots of strands of thread, this hook doesn't work as well, so I would suggest the wire threader that I used earlier. The last one is similar to the thumb needle threader, and it's called a fish hook threader. It does have a little bit more stability and it's easier to hold. There is a little hook in between the mouth of the fish that you can push through the needle, and that mouth helps to guide the needle in place. Once the hook is through the eye of the needle, you can loop the thread over the hook and pull it through. Now, these 3 tools come in really handy and make threading a needle so much easier. All right, now we are going to start stitching. I'm going to show you 4 stitches today: a back stitch, a lazy daisy, a French knot, and a satin stitch. These are all shown in your instruction guide and are some very basic stitches that you can also use on your paper crafting projects. Let's start with the back stitch on the holly. Bring the needle up through the fabric, then go back down behind where we came up about 1/16 of an inch away to form your first stitch. To create the second stitch, come back up in front of your starting point about 1/16 of an inch away, then go back down at that very first entry point. We're going to repeat this process for the remaining parts of the holly. Now, try your best to make the stitches all the same size, but this is a very forgiving stitch, so it's not going to show up if they're not all exactly the same. For those of you who are new to embroidery, I do suggest that you start with some cardstock or scrap fabric and give these stitches a try. I like to use the back stitch on my card making and scrapbook projects when I'm creating some simple lines. It's not a very difficult stitch and adds some great texture to my projects. Alright, so through the magic of video editing, I have skipped ahead to the final stitches. To finish this off, I'm going to go to the back side of the stocking and create a simple little loop knot to secure it in place. Now I want to show you how to create the berries with the French knot. The start of the knot requires 2 hands to get the tension right. So I have used one hand to hold the needle and the other hand to hold the thread. I'm going to place my needle in front of the thread I'm holding on the right side of the fabric. I'm going to wind the thread to make a knot. I need to wind from the back, not from the front. if I wind the knot from the front, it's not going to keep its shape. You want to keep the coil of the wrapped thread around the needle tight as you insert the needle back into the fabric close to the entry point. Don't go back down in the same spot you came up or the knot's going to unravel. Now you're going to slowly pull this tight until you have a little knot. I am using 6 strands of red thread for this one. The more thread you use, the larger the knot you're going to get. If you want a smaller knot, use less thread. Again, this is one that does require a little bit of practice, but it creates some sweet little berries on your projects. If you feel like this stitch is a little bit too complicated, go ahead and just go grab yourself some beads or add some pops of color for the berries. Pops of color do well on fabric, and they're really simple to use and dry rather quickly. All right, now that we have 3 knots for the berries, we're going to move on to the star. I have already stitched around the star using the back stitch just like I did with the holly. To create the little rays, I'm going to do what's called a lazy daisy stitch, which looks a lot like petals of a flower. I'm going to be using 2 strands of thread for this one because it's a more delicate stitch. I'm going to bring up the needle from underneath at the base of what would be the petal. Then I'm going to insert the needle right next to where I came up. There's going to be a small little gap. Now you don't want to pull this tight. Instead, you're going to leave it loose to form a little loop. Bring the needle back up at what would be considered the tip of the petal in the center of the loop, and then secure it by going back down on the other side of the looped thread, creating kind of a little stitch. As you pull this tight, you're going to be creating a little petal shape with that loop of thread. You can skip this stitch if you feel like it's a little bit too complicated and just create those rays with a straight stitch or a back stitch. I use the lazy daisy stitch for petals on my paper crafting projects. You can also create a chain of these to create a scrapbook page border. I'm going to be creating a lazy daisy chain at the top of my stocking, and I'll show you what that looks like later on. All right, so the last stitch is for the letters. For the satin stitch, you need 2 strands of thread. The more thread you use, the thicker your stitch is going to be. If you have a large area to fill, more thread makes the process go faster. Begin by bringing up the needle at the spot on the edge of the design, and then reinsert your needle directly across on the opposite side. Bring the needle back up as close to the first entry point as possible, and then insert the needle across the way as close to the second entry point as possible. You're basically creating a row of straight stitches. With satin stitching, you need to think about which stitches are going to be vertical and which stitches are going to be horizontal. When it comes to letters, we're going to work with the shape of the letter itself, using both vertical and horizontal stitches and a couple of diagonal stitches along the way. I found that it works best to start with the center of the letter and work your way around to create a better shape. If for some reason you do end up with too big of a gap between 2 of the stitches, you can go back and do a fill-in stitch. I would suggest you don't do it too often or your stitching isn't going to be as smooth, but I don't always get them super close either, so I often have to do those filler stitches. This is going to take you a little bit of time to complete, so you might want to turn on your favorite YouTube channel or binge watch a season of your favorite TV show while you stitch. If this is out of your comfort zone, just go ahead and use a straight stitch or a back stitch and outline the letters. I'm going to go off camera and finish my stitching, and then I'll show you the finished design and a few projects I made using the items I had left over from the kit. Here is the completed stocking I created. I finished the letters, holly, and added the remaining stars. This took me about 2 hours to complete while watching TV with my husband, so it was a rather quick project. The stars throughout the stocking were created using that same backstitch as the holly, and that border at the top is the lazy chain stitch I talked to you about. This is another option in the stitches instruction sheet. I chose to leave off the pom-poms because my kit came with a hot pink color that didn't quite match my design. I did, however, use that pom-pom trim and some of my supplies to make a really simple tag and card. I was able to iron on those embroidery designs onto some paper and cardstock and added those stitched designs. This pattern paper pack is another item in the Violet Studio collection. I love the classic designs and how versatile it is. For the card, I stitched the tree design onto some cardstock, added a sentiment from the paper pack, then wrapped some of the leftover gold thread above the sentiment before adhering it to my card base. On the tag, I added the same holly design I added from the stocking. I used pops of color for the berries and sanded my paper to create some distressing. At the top, I used that pom-pom trim and some leftover twine. I hope that today's project inspired you to try something new. Stitching and embroidery isn't for everyone, but this time of year I always enjoy trying out new projects to create something handmade for members of my family. If you're one who enjoys creating handmade projects, I do suggest giving these all-inclusive kits a try. Everything you need is included right inside the box, and you don't have to go out and buy a ton of new supplies or have too many items left over. If you're one who likes to pin projects to inspiration boards, I will be placing these photos on my website and in the scrapbook.com gallery for you to save. I want to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions about this project or the supplies listed below, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.